things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever home. Is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner, is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. Is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner, is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion? I'm lost in wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just illusion? I'm lost in a wonderland of confusion.
Don't you wish that your weekend was longer than just 2 days? Well, if so, then you're in luck, because here on Ripon Common Sense Radio, our weekend begins on Wednesday. Yes, you heard that right. Our weekend kicks off every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, with Dark Wolf's Den, starring yours truly, Jerry the Dark Wolf. But that's where the fun has only just begun. Make sure you come back every Thursday through Sunday at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, for the Ripon Rabbit Hole Live Show, starring AJ the Ripon Rabbit. He dives into the archives of vocal legend Art Bell and brings those stories up to date. So make sure that you spend your extended weekends with the Animals Radio, Jerry the Dark Wolf, and AJ the Ripon Rabbit, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, every Wednesday through Sunday, right here on Ripon Common Sense Radio.
Ripon Rabbit Hole is a community-driven radio. At times the community comments may reveal prejudices and other beliefs that we or our sponsors do not condone. Views or opinions expressed by the community, callers, or guests are those of the individual speaking and do not represent the views or opinions of this site. Ripon Common Sense content is intended for mature audiences only. Enjoy.
This is Cynthia Sue Larson with Reality Shifters and the International Mandela Effect Conference, and you're now listening to Dark Wolf's Den Show on Ripon Common Sense Radio.
Now the ultimate power in the universe.
This is your man Meta, aka Propagate This Light, and you're now listening to Dark Wolf's Den.
Are ghosts real?
We had 1,000 hours of continuous communication with the spirit world.
Does time travel actually exist?
The laws of physics seem to be compatible with time machines.
You know, sometimes I wonder about reincarnation. Don't you?
A 4-year-old boy in Adelaide, Australia, has told his parents that he used to be Britain's Princess Diana.
What would happen if the world found out that aliens were real?
I didn't say disclosure would be easy, but what is the alternative?
To establish a space force as the 6th branch of the armed forces.
We have so many questions and yet so little time, so to have you here, the pleasure is all mine.
Coming to you from a secret mountain cave, hidden deep within the Idaho wilderness, this is the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and welcome back to another episode of the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, the edge of your seat, or anywhere in between, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Thursday, September 24th, 2020, and tonight we're going to do the second part of the two-part series of the Madness or Space Madness series. Last night, as you guys know, we did the Moon Madness. Tonight, we're going to jump over one body and do the Mars Madness. That's right. There's a lot of talk of going to Mars and a lot of mysterious stuff that has been said to have been found on the so-called red planet. So we're going to discuss all that and more tonight, Thursday, September 24th, 2020, on the Dark Wolf's Den Show right here on Ripon Common Sense Radio. But first, today in history. On this day in 1493, Christopher Columbus embarks on his second expedition to the New World, setting sail with a fleet of 17 ships. That's right. This would be instrumental for Spain in trying to build their empire. And ladies and gentlemen, that is so fitting for tonight's topic. We'll get into that in just a minute. But that is tonight's Today in History. And once again, it is a fitting today in history as we are talking about Mars tonight. And as you guys, I'm sure, know by now, they are trying to make expeditions to the New World of Mars because we've run out of New World areas on the Earth itself. So now we've got to look elsewhere for new worlds to move to, especially if it's true and we are messing up this planet as badly as some of the quote scientists end quote say that we are, which, you know, I tend not to believe that, but again, that is my belief. But still, we're going to be moving eventually out into different worlds and different places, and perhaps we've already done that as a species. Of course, science tells us that we evolved here on this planet, and it's arguable how it began, but What if we did not evolve on this planet? What if we evolved somewhere else and ended up on this planet, somewhere like Mars? And why would I say something like that? Well, you remember back at the beginning of this series when we were talking about the Schumann resonance. The Schumann resonance episode, we discussed that the body, when it gets outside of the Earth's Schumann resonance, changes to a different frequency or different resonance on its own. Its natural resonance actually matches that of Mars. Interestingly enough, the circadian rhythm lines up with the circadian rhythm of Mars better than it does Earth when we are outside of the Earth's influence. And I find that very intriguing, but that is only one piece of evidence to suggest that that is the case.
Everybody knows the phrase, men are from Mars, women are from Venus.
I don't know about you guys, I've met some pretty strange women in my time. Possibly they were Venusian, you never know.
Obviously, it's not literal. We're all actually from Alpha Centauri.
I would definitely argue that we're not from Alpha Centauri. Maybe just a little bit closer in our solar system. Maybe something like Mars?
An American ecologist named Dr. Ellis Silver claimed to have spotted a few telltale signs that humans did not originate from Earth and that we're actually beings from another world.
And I don't know about Alpha Centauri. I think maybe something a little closer like Mars possibly could be where we resided before we made it to the Earth. I actually heard a very famous radio announcer named Michael Barra. He's from the Late Night in the Midlands. Shout out to you, Michael, if you ever listen to this. But anyway, old Michael Barra, he always says that if you take the Bible, turn it around, start in Revelation, end in Genesis, and start the story on Mars and end it on Earth, it makes so much more sense. And I gotta say, I can't disagree with that, and we'll see why as we go on this evening.
There is a pretty well-accepted theory out there that organic matter may have been delivered to planet Earth by meteors, perhaps as single-celled organisms or just as the building blocks of life, such as amino acids.
For those interested, this idea is called panspermia, and I would actually agree with the argument that that is how octopus ended up on this planet. As different as they are from every other species, especially water species, as smart as they are, their ability to change their DNA on the fly, they are what I would consider an alien creature. And perhaps there was octopus eggs, or octopi eggs if you will, in a meteorite that perhaps struck the ocean and cracked open and let the protected egg out, the egg that was protected within the rock itself, and it just went on to become what we now know today as octopus. It is not completely out of the realm of an acknowledgement that this could happen. Once again, this idea is called panspermia, but we're going to go a little further than the idea of panspermia.
But Dr. Silver went one step further, that we arrived as fully formed complex organisms between 60,000 and 200,000 years ago. Perhaps we interbred with Neanderthals, and perhaps we're just straight up aliens.
In other words, if it is true that we developed elsewhere in the galaxy or in the universe, we developed fully human formed before we ever made it to Earth, according to this theory. And once again, let's keep in mind, this is just that. It is theory, not fact. This is just ideas we're going through tonight. There is no fact here opposed to saying this is the way it is without a doubt. I'm really presenting evidences to suggest things are one way or the other, because we talked last night a lot about teaching theory as fact, and that's the last thing I want to do. So again, to reiterate, this is theory, not fact.
All Silver knows is that there are some things about our physiology that just doesn't add up. Citing everything from sunburn to childbirth in his book Humans Are Not From Earth, a scientific evaluation of the evidence, Dr. Ellis Silver points out all the things that seem to contradict the idea that we evolved over millions of years in our earthly environment.
And once again, when we started this space series with the Schumann Resonance Challenge episode, we did discuss how the Schumann resonance is different and actually matches the circadian rhythm of Mars opposed to Earth, and that's only one physiological differential.
I'm Cal from WhatCulture.com.
Well, hello Cal, it's a pleasure to meet you and have you in the den with us tonight. What do you got for us? What kind of information you got to show us tonight?
And this is 7 reasons why humans may not have come from Earth.
And we're going to make the case in this part just that we are not from Earth. Not necessarily that we're from Mars, just that we're not from Earth itself.
Number 7. We look so different. Right, so what's the deal with this bipedal thing? How come everything else on the planet has remained perfectly happy with a low centre of gravity and a sturdy base?
Although it can be argued we are not the only creature on the planet that does use bipedal form. We're the only ones that use bipedal form on a consistent basis. Most monkeys and creatures of, gorillas, monkeys, things of that nature, do walk bipedally, but they a lot of times will also bend over and use their front arms like legs also.
Whereas we wobble around on 2 legs. Perhaps it's just because we're looking at it from the inside, but you have to admit that we tend to stick out a bit. 2 legs, extremely fine coat, hair growing out of odd places, opposable thumbs, huge heads, big, flat feet. We look much more like aliens than natives.
And it's true, if you look around the planet, humans are the only things that look like we do. Everything else on this planet is much, much more primitive and differently built and styled than humans are.
Silver points to our lack of body hair as a particularly odd feature of humans. It is necessary for humans to wrap themselves in furs of other animals, just to stop ourselves freezing to death.
And that is one thing that bothers me, and I'm pretty sure this is going to come up one more time at least, but the fact that we can freeze to death and nature is so harsh against us. If we developed with the planet itself, and the idea of Darwinism is true, and we literally evolve through time with the planet, then we should have already evolved to very much more be able to take this planet on physically and it not bother us as much as it does. However, that is not the case.
Even on the hot African plains, where we're supposed to have evolved. The theory is that perhaps on our home planet the temperature didn't fluctuate so much between night and day and at different latitudes. Possible reasons for this could be a thicker cloud layer that insulates a planet, a bit like on Venus, a binary star system so that the sun effectively never sets, or even that the crust of the planet is much thinner, allowing the heat from the molten core to come up through the ground.
That would also explain why we have much less body hair opposed to every other creature on this planet. And I just don't buy the idea that we evolved the body hair away, because I haven't seen monkeys, apes, or gorillas evolve it away, and if that's the case, we should be seeing more and more naked gorillas and naked monkeys that we just do not see with a more human-like form.
As a weird side note, our relatively high levels of subcutaneous fat and almost total hairlessness, as well as our bipedalism, actually makes us excellent swimmers. Maybe we were some kind of race of semi-aquatic dolphin people on our home planet.
And just like the idea of our fingers wrinkling when they stay in the water too long, that's actually a way for us to be able to pick up items after we've been in the water after a while. Our body naturally creates that way for the wet body to do that, as if it was evolved for a while for whatever reason from something that lived, at least like it said, semi-underwater. Again, this is all just theory.
Number 6. We're too advanced. The most conspicuously different feature of the human race is just how much more advanced we are when we're compared to the rest of life on Earth. Why are we so far ahead of every other animal? It sounds like classic human arrogance, but for all our talk about how intelligent dolphins are because they can recognize themselves in a mirror, they didn't invent the bloody mirror, did they?
And even speaking of talk, the fact that we can talk at all opposed to any other creature on this planet. It's said that different creatures have different ways of communicating with each other, and that's quite understandable and quite believable, but we are able to literally talk all the time, and no other creature on this planet is got that ability among other abilities that humans have, and no other creature on this planet is able to do.
Okay, how about if we argue that inventing things like wheels and mirrors and social media executives isn't necessarily an indicator of intelligence? It's still drastically different to what everything else on the planet is doing. Why are we such outcasts from the natural world? It could be because it's not our natural world. If we arrived on a primitive Earth with a head start, it could explain why we appear to be leaps and bounds ahead of every other species. Dr. Silver also cites the fact that the missing link that would connect us with our common ape ancestors is still
missing.
And just to point out, there would be no moral conflict if the planet was only habitated by just lower form life, deer, fish, the animals we see around us all the time, and not an upper form of life like another style of human or another alien species, because at that point it would be a moralistic issue. But we don't find that in our fossil records, so as we know, that wasn't the case, or as we believe that wasn't the case from the fossil record that we have so far. But then again, we all know how archaeologists and geologists are, right? But let's not dig into that rabbit hole. Let's stick with what we got tonight.
I mean, it's not, but never mind. We could have come from a planet where a number of species were similarly advanced. Perhaps that's even the reason we left, to go and rule elsewhere.
And as we will see why here in a little while, I would argue that we left because there was a catastrophe where the original home world would have been, and we had to escape to save our civilization. That is why I would argue that something like that would have happened in the early, or ancient past, I would say. I don't even know how to say that. Late past, the early past. Way, long time ago.
It all seemed to happen at once, too. Evolutionary speaking, it took us freaking ages to get the hang of sharpened rocks, and then all of a sudden we invented agriculture, writing, language, art, electricity, machinery, chemistry, quantum physics, and pretty much everything else around us today. What the hell happened?
Yeah, even taking the scientist word for, how often we don't do that around here, but taking their word for it, even, it doesn't make sense, because how could we go from super primitive, slowly learning stuff, to all of a sudden we know everything about the world? That is really odd. And of course there's the arguments that aliens come down and taught humans, but perhaps we had learned it elsewhere and brought it with us from another world.
Number 5. We can't sleep. One of Silver's arguments is that the human circadian rhythm is out of whack with the actual day-night cycle on Earth.
And of course, once again, we spoke about this earlier in the episode.
The circadian rhythm is the thing that regulates your sleeping and eating patterns. It means that you're tired at night and awake in the morning, and it's the reason why you feel jet-lagged after a long-haul flight. As the Earth's day and night cycle lasts for around 24 hours, not including leap seconds, because, come on, it would make sense for our circadian rhythm to also be on a 24-hour cycle. But it's not. Dr. Silver uses the argument that the human circadian rhythm is a 25-hour cycle, meaning that it makes more sense that we should have evolved on a planet with a 25-hour day. Unfortunately, Silver is wrong with the 25-hour figure, but not about the fact that it doesn't match up. It used to be thought that our circadian rhythm was a whole hour off. Turns out it's actually anything from a quarter to half of an hour off.
And I just looked up what the length of a day on Mars is. Interestingly enough, it is 24 hours and 37 minutes. Between 30 and 45 minutes off from the Earth's rotation. This would match up perfectly with our odd circadian rhythm.
This doesn't seem like much until you realise that, providing you stuck to your natural circadian rhythm, it would only take you a month to be potentially 7 hours out of whack. That's a whole night's sleep for most people. This means that our home planet could have been slightly bigger than Earth in order to have a longer day, although, again, it's not quite that simple.
Well, the planet that I would suggest is actually slightly smaller than Earth, but it's got a different rotation because it's further out from the sun, so it would have a slower rotation. But just the same, I would argue that it's Mars that we started on and then came to the Earth later. But again, we'll get into more of that here shortly.
Number 4. We don't like it here. Evolution generally means that a species adapts to its environment, but we don't seem to want to play that game. A big part of the theory comes down to the fact that we've altered the planet to fit us, rather than the other way round. We just can't seem to bear living in the natural world. The fact that we have altered our environment so drastically makes it seem as though that we're just not suited to living in the Earth's natural habitat. In fact, what we're doing appears not to be evolving so much as terraforming.
And I'm not sure if it's gonna come up in this or not, but sunburning. Why does the sun burn us? Again, if we evolved here with the sun, with the Earth, with everything around us, then why does the sun, just like the cold, have such an extreme effect upon us as humans? Why do we sunburn so easily? And yes, the argument can be made, the different atmosphere layers, but again, as he said, why do we not adapt to this earth as easily as most other creatures does? As we know, the octopus can literally rewrite its own DNA on the fly for adaptation. So why are humans so unable to adapt to the point that, again, like he said, it almost looks like we're terraforming at times?
Another of Silver's arguments is that we're seemingly terrible at reading our own planet. Many animals have built-in sensors for natural phenomena such as earthquakes, tsunamis, and even just the ability to predict the weather.
This is also very, very true. If you've ever seen animals right before an earthquake or a regular natural disaster occurs, for some reason, somehow, they know it's about to happen. They have these weird connections to the magnetic fields and to the pressures of the earth that for some reason humans just don't have. It's almost like they evolved here and maybe we did not.
Whereas we have had to intervene with our technology in order to keep up with them.
And as a matter of fact, especially in flight, we take a lot of our ideas from the animal world, which again I find very, very odd.
It could mean that we came from a planet that is not so geologically active, meaning that there would be no benefit for us to be able to predict earthquakes. Then we have the fact that we can't eat most of the food on this planet without altering it in some way.
And this is something else that I didn't originally think about, but there are so many things on this planet that can poison us so easily, even especially in the food category like mushrooms, for instance. But there are so many things here that can end us so quickly and so easily, and yet again, why do we have to cook our food? Why do we have to do certain things to get rid of things like that are in the natural kingdom, natural animal world, no problem, but us, it is deadly and very, very bad for our health? Why is it all of a sudden a problem when it comes to humans opposed to all the other creatures on this planet? Like I said, I hadn't thought about the food aspect prior to this, so that is very interesting to me, I gotta say.
Whether it's by cooking it or through selective breeding, most of our food is not as nature intended it. We're not saying that our home planet had hamburger trees and rivers of lemonade. I mean, if it does, then book us a one-way ticket to Alpha Centauri.
I haven't seen any lemonade trees in the pictures that have come from Mars thus far, and we'll talk about those later also, as well as the face on Mars. There's so much to cover in this episode, guys. We have barely even began to scratch the surface. Matter of fact, we haven't even really done that yet. We're just making a case for why we may not have evolved on Earth, and possibly may have actually evolved on a planet like Mars, if not Mars itself.
But the fact that most animals, apart from us, are perfectly fine eating grass and raw zebra is a bit weird. Number 3. Rapid overpopulation. Humans are spreading, and they're spreading fast. There are over 7 billion of us crammed into this tiny little planet, and the number is always going up. Not exactly a balanced ecosystem. It's almost as though we're an invasive species. What happens when you introduce a new species into an environment that they didn't evolve in? A lot of the time, they take over. This is due to the fact that they do not have the natural predators, and the local fauna are not equipped to defend themselves against them. This means that the non-native species has free rein to hunt, eat and breed, with the potential to decimate the local environment.
And we are told that we have domain over all the plants and creatures and fish of this earth, but it does make you wonder if the reason that we have domain is because we are an invasive species, like he said, who has come in, taken over, and has no natural predator, which we do not, except for ourselves.
This does sound an awful lot like how we interact with the natural world. We are so far up the food chain that we don't even feature as the apex predator in it. We actually exist outside of the Earth's ecosystem. It does seem to scream foreign species. Even with other invasive species, the ecosystem will often find a way to restore itself back to normality.
Could this environment seeking an ecosystem seeking to restore itself to balance be what we call climate change, perhaps?
With normal imbalances in nature, that balance can be quickly restored again as the food runs out, and the invading species will quickly begin to reduce in number again. This doesn't appear to have happened to humans so far. Perhaps when the resources finally do run out, will go the way of many other species and simply become one rogue algae bloom in the long natural history of the planet.
And most of us have heard most of our lives how there's just not enough resources to go around, and we're going to run out of resources because there's too many of us and we're populating too quickly. Everything he says matches up to really point to the idea that it might be true that we are from elsewhere in the universe.
Number 2. A prison planet. One of Dr. Silver's slightly more out there theories is that the Earth may actually be a prison colony for a society of galactic beings. It is apparently our naturally violent, vengeful, lustful, criminal nature that makes him think like this. The fact that you don't often observe this kind of behaviour in the animal kingdom makes Silver think that it could well be that these are traits that come from a completely different race of people. The theory is that we could have had our memories wiped and been dumped in a primitive backwater by a civilization of spacefaring beings as a sort of cooling off period, presumably after becoming too much of a menace to intergalactic society. Perhaps they hoped that we would integrate with the natural world on a young planet and become a peaceful race of hunter-gatherers or something, but actually what happened is we almost immediately wiped out Neanderthals and set about transforming the Earth to suit our antisocial ways, so they left us here.
Which does kind of start to match up with ancient myths. If we look at them a little differently and not assume that the very, very, very ancient ones started here, but perhaps they arrived here, and they say that a lot of them say their gods come from this or that star system. Perhaps they mean their ancestors opposed to their gods. It also would explain why a lot of the technology we don't seem to have today that looks like it appeared in the ancient times. So that might be the reason all of this knowledge got wiped, because perhaps we were a spacefaring civilization at one time, and because we messed up too badly, as we see we're still a very warring and mean civilization in general, then perhaps, like it mentioned, we messed up so badly that they just decided we're going to let them start over on this young planet, and perhaps they'll get it right this time. It looks like we haven't quite got there yet if you judge by today's modern society, but again, that's just this wolf's opinion.
To be fair, given our earthbound history of shipping criminals off to somewhere out of sight and out of mind, this does sound like exactly the sort of thing that we'd do if we ever became a planet-hopping race of pangalactic beings. The question is, has it already happened? Number 1. So where did we come from?
And thank you, Cal. I'm going to go ahead and take over here. Where did we come from? That is the magic $1 million question, isn't it? And it is my belief that Mars is the answer. And why would we leave Mars? What would have happened that would have driven a civilization out of their home world? Well, there's actually evidence to suggest we might know what that is also.
I'm going to talk this morning briefly about what is unspoken now in Mars science. In fact, what is unspeakable. I am going to utter unspeakable things that are now concrete science from Mars.
Don't worry, the things he's going to say are still FCC regulated, so we can still play it for you. It's just unspeakable in the science realms.
Please, a report from Mars. This is the first appearance of the face on Mars. It was in science fiction in 1958. We are indebted to Dick Hoagland, whom I'm very proud to have worked with in the early parts of the Mars investigation. And he discovered that it appeared in Kirby Comics. And I probably read this comic book when I was a kid. We were pre-programmed to find the face on Mars.
You guys remember the predictive programming show AJ did a week or two ago, and it's interesting that the face on Mars was actually a predictive programming. That's intriguing.
That mainstream science will not talk about. But that burning image of a humanoid face on Mars.
And we'll get more into the face on Mars and the artifacts found on Mars in the second half of the episode.
At the dawn of the space age, they just launched Sputnik when this comic book came out. The story they find on Mars, inside the face, by the way, when they explore it, is that Mars was destroyed by yet another extraterrestrial and more advanced civilization that came to Mars and attempted to conquer it, couldn't conquer it, and destroyed the entire planet in their frustration.
And again, that is the plot of the comic book, but it's interesting because that is actually the theory that I particularly buy and has been put forward quite a bit, is that there was some type of nuclear devastation on Mars, and what we're about to hear momentarily is the evidence of that nuclear devastation.
This is the Chicxulub of Mars. And all of the stuff I'm presenting, by the way, has been presented at scientific conferences, mainstream scientific conferences.
So this isn't just some conspiracy theorist presenting an idea. This is information presented to scientists at scientific conferences and being presented by a physicist. So this is kind of stuff that really makes my ears perk up and take notice.
The Leo impact crater. It's as big as Chicxulub that wiped out the dinosaurs, only it happened on a planet only half the size of Earth. It only got half the sunlight. So on Earth, the Chicxulub event killed 95% of all the living things on Earth. But the biosphere had suffered a serious wound, but it recovered after a few million years, and the age of mammals began. The dinosaurs were wiped out, the mammals took over, and eventually leading to us.
At least that is the leading theory, but again, let's be careful not to be taught theory as fact.
This impact was so terrible, it killed the biosphere. The wound was mortal because of the fragility of the Martian climate system. Mars probably died in one day. Next. Here's what else we know. Mars is red. The Earth is also red. This is the Sahara Desert. The areas of Earth that are not covered by water or forest or clouds are bright red. They are red because of oxidized iron.
And as we heard in the Moon Madness episode yesterday, the moon is actually rusting, which has a red color, which again is from oxidized iron. So all of these objects, of these bodies, have oxidized iron that can rust within them. Earth, Mars, and the moon, all three.
Is red. Mars, the reason Earth is red is because it's got oxygen in its atmosphere. Lava is full of iron. It comes out, it's black because that's iron in its lowest oxidation state, the ferrous state. It then accepts another oxygen, becomes ferric iron, called hematite, same as the color of our blood.
And exactly the same as what they think was found on the moon, once again, hematite. But I said a moment ago that I thought a catastrophe had happened on Mars. Something really, really bad had happened that drove humans from Mars to Earth. At least that is my theory. And what I believe was some type of nuclear war or nuclear event. And here's why.
And apparently it was a nuclear catastrophe, which is very, very difficult to explain in terms of natural phenomenon. We have on Earth found that there are natural nuclear reactors that formed in uranium deposits. They formed, by the way, with the aid of biology, because bacteria, for some reason, like to concentrate uranium. Apparently, they were using the radioactivity of uranium as a fuel source. One theory for what happened is that something like that happened on Mars, but on a much more massive scale than it happened on Earth. They found 7 different sites where there were natural nuclear reactors. They're amazed that none of them exploded.
And these are 7 different sites scattered across Mars. And I think we've spoken of the natural nuclear reactor before, and the idea that it possibly wasn't as natural as is explained by science. But if we're finding them on other planets, perhaps there is a natural reason. But like he said, when they find them on Earth, it is due to bacteria. So would the same reasons apply on Mars? Would it be due to a bacteria of some type on Mars that has allowed these nuclear reactors to be formed naturally under the ground? And again, even if it is, they're not concentrated in one area, but spread across the entire area of Mars.
In this reactor core, would drive all of it out by steam. You would see steam geysers 1 billion years ago. By the way, all the uranium on Earth was reactor grade 1 billion years ago. was 3% uranium-235, which is modern reactor grade. On Mars, apparently, though, something very massive occurred. Next slide. This is the slide of uranium, of the xenon found in the Martian atmosphere. These are the stable isotopes of xenon. And you'll notice this big spike. Here, the blue one is Earth. It matches the rest of the xenon except at 129. 129 is produced by the decay of uranium, of iodine-129, which is produced in nuclear explosions. It's also produced in nuclear reactors. But what produces your xenon-129 very quickly in enormous amounts is a nuclear explosion. So if there was a natural reactor on Mars that formed because of Mars groundwater, perhaps after the Leo impact, which shifted water underground, the explosion was equal to all of the hydrogen bombs detonated on Earth, detonated at once.
That type of explosion is incredibly massive, to say the least.
Mars rocks are actually have less potassium and thorium than Earth rocks. We know that because we have Mars meteorites. But the surface of Mars appears to have normal Earth standard potassium and thorium. So this is very hard to explain, so scientists simply just don't talk about it.
Which, as we know, is one of the dogmatic scientists' favorite trick is, let's just not acknowledge it or talk about it at all. Let's pretend it does not exist.
And this is typically what you find in a large explosion on a planet. You find a big crater on one side and a pile of debris on the exact other side, because the shock waves wrap around the planet and focus on the far side. So that big this red spot here is almost the exact antipode of this. And this apparently came over the pole, is on the other side of the pole, reached over the pole. You had raying effects like you get on Copernicus crater on the moon.
And there it is, scientific evidence of an unexplained amount of xenon-129, which is only produced in large amounts in nuclear explosions.
Completely inexplicable, unless there's only one way to explain this. A large nuclear explosion, like a large nuclear reactor of massive proportions compared to what they found on Earth, created itself on Mars and exploded. The other big problem, I'll tell you why this is doubly unspeakable. There's no big crater.
Now, wait a minute. If it was an underground explosion of a natural nuclear reactor, there should be a super-sized crater where everything blew upwards and outwards. That's how physics works. So if there's no crater, that creates a problem. That suggests something entirely different. Tell us, John, what does that suggest?
At this place, there's just a big burn spot, which suggests it was an airburst.
Which means that it could not have been...
not buried underground.
Right, so now that's interesting. An airburst, an explosion from the air of some type, a nuclear explosion from the air of some type.
The only people who can make airburst nuclear explosions are people like us. It's possible, of course, to bury a uranium or thorium-rich asteroid in Mars and then saturate it with water and with some bacteria concentrating everything, get a natural nuclear reactor, but that would seem to form a large crater when it exploded. This explosion seems to have left no crater, just a big burn spot on the ground. So there, I've told you unspeakable things.
Yes, I would argue that there was some type of catastrophe, even maybe a nuclear war between two races that maybe in a greater antiquity actually lived on Mars. Perhaps one of those races being the human race. And we are going to go ahead and take a network break right here. We're going to get back into Mars and a lot of the evidences that have been found on Mars and perhaps get a better idea of what may have been happening with Mars in greater antiquity, and perhaps Mars was not much different than Earth is today. But again, we're going to go ahead and take a network break right here. We'll discuss all that when we come back for the second half of the Dark Wolf's Den Show, exclusively on Ripon Common Sense Radio. So don't you touch that dial.
We gotta stoke the fires and run off the men in black. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
Sex in the city? Nope. Interview with a vampire? Nope. If you build it, they will come? Febreze? Tweeze in the middle? Wrong again. Depends. Nope. Welcome to the Twilight Zone, my friends. A phenomenon known as the Mandela Effect. You may have heard of it. You may want to not neglect unbecoming, awake, and spiritually inclined. So sit back, relax, while I blow your mind. Take the thumb off the cell, stop following the sheep. Down the rabbit hole we go. Are you ready for that leap? The Zapruder film, #JFK. I looked at the footage and I said, what the heck? How come there are 6 people in that dang car? Stretch limo, for me, this was all too bizarre. A glass behind the driver, no way, Jose. I remember before in the car, my mind was in total disarray. Trying to make sense of what I was seeing, what I was witnessing. Didn't connect with my inner being. A second woman in the car for me was only the first lady. Do you smell what the rock is cooking? All this seemed kinda shady. Berenstein Bears. Nope. Shazam? Sinbad? Not in this reality. Good lord. An awakening. Was it all a revelation? The naysayers and skeptics call it confabulation. They say we misremembered and call us back. Crazy, did you smoke a doob? Maybe that's why it's a little bit hazy. Unless you experience it, you'll never know. But enough of that, on with this Mandela Effect flow. Mandela Effect in the house. What if the world happened to Ed McMahon? In this reality, Publishers Clearinghouse was not a fan. Never the spokesperson, but we remember it clear as day. McMahon holding that check while the winner yelled out, yay! American Family Publishers, never heard of them until now. This Mandela Effect has me raising the people's eyebrow. So many theories on what it could be. Have you ever heard of CERN and the LHC? Luke, I am your father. Nope. Sally Fields? Nope, wrong again. That stands for the Large Hadron Collider. I thought I would mention. You know, the machine that opens up portals into different dimensions? You're probably thinking that this is all science fiction, but you gotta think outside the box and have no restrictions. Alternate realities and parallel dimensions. Okay, I get some of your apprehensions. Could this all be a spiritual evolution? Cause the human race has grown tired of this toxic pollution. Mandela Effect in the house. Crazy. Some people, they just don't understand. That's just the way it is. You know? Stay strong, my friends. That's just the way it is. Dolly has no braces? Are you serious? Good lord. Joel Osteen. Oh wait, Joel Osteen. So what the heck happened to the owl? Oh my gosh. Oh, this is definitely the Twilight Zone. This is crazy.
Anyhow, Juanito, 1975 with the Mandela Effect rap. Unbelievable stuff. I can't wait for the video on that. If you've enjoyed tonight's show, Mars Madness, please make sure to thumb up that video, hit that subscribe button, and ring that bell. You'll get our notifications every time we go live. I'll be back again tomorrow night, Friday, with a special look and an episode I call Unmasked. I've just been on a 1,600-mile road trip from Southern California to Northern California, and I think it's time to talk about taking off the mask. If we don't talk about it now, We're going to be stuck with these things forever. So tune in tomorrow night starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, as we explore down the rabbit hole and I report on the journey that I've just accomplished as a special episode of Unmasked begins. Then Saturday night, join us September 26th, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, for a look at procrastination. Why do today what you could put off until tomorrow? It's going to be a lot of fun Saturday night. Then Sunday, we'll end out the weekend right. Sunday, September 27th, with a topic that's an audience suggestion topic, string theory. It's going to be wild as all the strings are tied together in knots. So join us and find out how string theory applies to today in 2020. A wonderful way to end out the weekend right. Sunday night, September 27th, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. I'm excited for the weekend ahead. We'll be back to Jerry Hicks and the Dark Wolf's Den Show. My top hat's off for him filling in tonight as we've completed now our road trip. Nikki Rabbit and I'm pleased to say, are back in Las Vegas. We're back at home. We're back in the studio, and nothing feels better. And I can't wait to tell you about the road trip we just endured. Unbelievable stuff. Tune in tomorrow night, and I'm going to tell you all about it in Unmasked. If you haven't done so already, please jump on over to the riponrabbithole.com and join our mail list. We'll send you out our weekend schedule every Wednesday night as we bring you the very best of Common Sense Radio every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights. Make sure that you join that mail list. You'll get our schedule direct to your inbox every Wednesday morning. We'll be back to Jerry Hicks and the Dark Wolf's Den Show as he howls at Mars right here on the Ripon Rabbit Hole. Stick around, a lot more to come. An exciting weekend ahead.
If you were meant to be controlled, you would have come with a remote, but you didn't. And that's why you listen to the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and welcome back to the second half of the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, the edge of your seat, or anywhere in between, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is September 24th, 2020, and we are discussing Mars Madness. This is, of course, the second half of our Madness series. We started last night with Moon Madness, and this is the end of the space series that we started way back with the Schumann Resonance episode. So this is a really good bookend episode for both of those series at once. So I hope you guys have enjoyed thus far. And so far we've discussed the idea that humans did not originate on planet Earth. Just the idea of that. Again, I don't want to say that's fact. We discussed evidences that could suggest that humans did not originate on the planet Earth. Also, we discussed the idea that there is a nuclear explosion of some type on the planet of Mars that could have been where humans originally were. But is there any evidence to suggest that? I know I'm sitting here theorizing quite a bit that we lived on Mars, and if that was the case, and when I say we, I mean the human race itself, if that was the case, then is there any evidence to suggest that Mars could even hold life at all? Not even to suggest yet that we have found in any life or any ruins or any artifacts, which again we'll get to that shortly, but is there any evidence at all that Mars could have even held life at any time in greater antiquity or in antiquity at all?
Found on Mars with all the recent probes. And second, what have we covered up? I'll address the first one. The unspeakable science of Mars.
And once again, this is Dr. John Brandenburg we'll be hearing from here for just a little bit longer.
This is what Mars looked like apparently until recent geologic time. The reason we know that is the Mars Polar Lander landed on the northern plains of Mars.
And my apologies, I didn't have a chance to grab pictures for the show notes this evening, but what the picture he's holding up looks like is basically a different version of Earth with oceans and land masses, and basically to suggest that Mars was Earth-like at one point in antiquity.
Found an ice layer 6 inches below the surface. That used to be ocean. It's as smooth as a billiard ball up there. There are no craters. That means that part of Mars is young geologically. It hasn't, the way they date things on Mars is how many craters does it have? More craters, more age since its last resurfacing. The northern parts of Mars are where the ocean bed was, and they are the youngest parts of Mars.
Which to me would make a lot of sense because they were under the water. Therefore, the water, once evaporated, would have left the land that was more untouched, or the youngest of the land mass areas.
And based on the fact that Mars gets a lot more craters per year than the Moon does, we can approximately date the time of the last of the great ocean, northern ocean of Mars, which makes, basically, if you have liquid water on the surface of a planet, it means it defines terrestrial conditions. They had an atmosphere, roughly 1 atmosphere. They had temperatures of the liquid support water, and this was supported apparently by a massive CO2 and methane greenhouse.
And for those that don't know, the greenhouse effect is actually extremely important in making the Earth Earth-like, as far as the gases trapping in the amount of heat needed to keep the Earth at the temperatures needed to support life. And we know that Mars' atmosphere no longer exists, therefore it no longer has the greenhouse gases needed to hold in and trap these heating and things like that that's needed to sustain life and sustain temperatures that would allow water or liquid formed water on the surface.
Mars is covered at depth with highly oxygenated iron. Apparently it had an oxygen-rich atmosphere in the past. That means photosynthesis. Mars had probably a massive biosphere before it died. And Mars' biosphere, this massive biosphere, probably lasted for 4 billion years, almost as long as Earth's, and was probably just as prolific.
So if you have water and oxygen and all the ingredients needed, then the likelihood of life being there is more likely than not, in my opinion. Of course, science says water is the #1 finding you need to prove life. So if we can prove that water existed on Mars in the past, which isn't hard to prove at all, then it's easy to suggest that at one point in the past, life, if not humans themselves, could have very well existed on this planetoid body.
Apparently, not only did Mars die in a day, leading to a planetary mass extinction, the first extraterrestrial mass extinction we will find in the cosmos, but also apparently first it perished with ice and then with fire. So it's very strange. And both of these events occurred near Cydonia, bracketing it.
For those that do not know, Cydonia is where they found the face on Mars, the famous face on Mars picture now, as well as other artifacts, if you will, that we will get to here shortly.
Faces have always held power to humanity. A face is among the easiest things for a human being to recognize. From birth, one sees faces and identifies with them, somehow making the connection between one's own face and the others. Considering the amount of faces one might need to see and distinguish during any given day, it is no surprise how easy it is to identify a face.
As a matter of fact, it is so instinctual that our brain and eyes look for faces everywhere. Everywhere that we can see, mainly so we can know where the threats are and are not. But we see faces in pretty much everything. And a lot of people call that pareidolia, but it's funny how many times science jumps to pareidolia as an explanation for something that they cannot explain away any other way. Oh, it must be an illusion. It must not be real. you know, the dogmatic explanations. We've all heard them all before.
In 1976, the Viking 1 orbiter was taking images of the Cydonia region of Mars. The area contained several mesas, which were believed to be natural. However, one image appeared to contain something instantly recognizable: a humanoid face.
To reiterate, this picture has been taken on the surface of Mars. A humanoid face on the surface of Mars. And that actually is not even the only face that has been captured on Mars.
Interesting that there are two other faces on Mars in a place called Utopia on the other side of the planet, also on the shores of the ancient ocean. Cydonia was on the shore of the ancient ocean of Mars. It was the Riviera of Mars. In fact, that was where they wanted to land the first Viking lander was in Cydonia.
The fact that it would have been built at the edge of an ancient ocean, if the people that lived there at the time, you know, lived near that area clearly, the idea that they would build a structure right next to a water source is exactly what we do here on Earth today. We build a lot of structures next to water sources like that, so to think they wouldn't put a monument along a water source, that's kind of silly not to think that wouldn't happen.
The first Viking lander was in Cydonia, but then after taking a bunch of pictures, they decided not to. In fact, even that decision is full of controversy. No one can figure out who made the decision. It wasn't the people in charge of the mission, as it turns out. Suddenly they got the pronouncement that Cydonia was too rocky to land the Viking lander in. So they landed it someplace else. They landed at a place north of this area called Utopia. Here, this object and this object, in a book that Vince DiPietro and I wrote, we analyzed this. We found out that here's two eyes, nose, and mouth, and there's a mark on the cheek, and apparently you find the same markings on the original face. This face, however, is only 2/3 the size.
And once again, my sincere apologies that I was not able to get some screen grabs tonight and put anything in our show notes, but it, as you're hearing, is a smaller version of the first face found on Mars, but still a clearly, distinctly humanoid face just the same.
Whereas in Cydonia, we had two good images taken a month apart. So, but David has in his possession a copy of the book where this is all discussed with a new image addendum. So that's really my report from Mars. Nothing has changed on Mars except the depth to which we are cynical about our government's ability to disclose facts.
And as we discussed in Day After Disclosure, our government's ability to disclose truth and facts is not that good, actually. Our government isn't that good at all at disclosing truth, not by any means, but covering up something that they find like on Mars, that doesn't surprise me even a little bit. And I would look at a lot of these pictures myself, these images sent back from Mars, and a lot of people say they've seen different things in them, from animals to insects to... What got me, I looked at these expecting to find nothing, understand? I want to look at these as skeptically as I can. I don't want to go in expecting to find something. I want to go in expecting to find nothing and be surprised. That way I'm not biasing myself. So when I do, and when I have looked at these pictures, I will tell you there is one anomalous thing that I personally have found, and I've not seen really any videos about this, but one thing I've noticed about the landscape itself is that it has ramps everywhere. I mean huge ramps, large ramps, like these were built by a civilization for some reason to reach higher areas, higher mesas, higher plain areas. I don't know, but it's like a lot of ramps were built. Maybe they were temples, maybe they were religious sites. Again, this is speculation, the maybe, of course, you know. But I could not get over the fact that there are so many pictures of Mars that have ramps just all over the place. And you could argue, I guess, that these are natural formations, but it's pretty odd to have that many naturally formed ramps the way they are, and just the way they're angled, and they look perfectly cut out or created or constructed, or just if you ever get a chance, go take a look at some of the pictures released from the supposed Mars rover, because I will also concede that some people don't even believe that the planet exists, or a planet can exist, or space exists. And for those guys, I do apologize. This episode probably isn't up your alley, these last couple episodes, but we will get back to an earthly topic pretty soon. But once again, the ramps on Mars, I can't get over the fact that there is naturally looking built ramps all over the place on Mars. Now, I don't know if there's one near Cydonia and the pyramid area and all of that, but I do know that I've seen so many that I can't dismiss it. And this is something, once again, that I noticed myself going in expecting to find absolutely nothing but a dead world and a bunch of sand pictures. But as it turns out, a lot of these pictures show a lot of really strange evidences.
I'm Stevie from WhatCulture.com.
Well, hello, Stevie. What do you have for us today?
And here are the 9 strangest things spotted on Mars.
Now, that sounds like a very interesting list to me. Let's hear what you got.
Number 9. Pyramid. When this strangely angular rock was photographed by the Curiosity rover in 2015, UFO fanatics immediately cried pyramid.
And let me tell you, looking at this picture myself, anything less than a pyramid would be ridiculous. This is absolutely a pyramid if I have ever seen one. Like, it's not even a question, maybe, maybe not. No, this rock is perfectly shaped like a pyramid. Whether it is or not, whether it's erosion or not, I highly doubt, but that's just me. Anyway, I'm here to tell you guys, the picture they've taken here is some type of pyramid. Also, earlier we spoke of the Cydonia region where the original face on Mars was photographed. There were also pyramids that were found in that area too, right next to the face, as a matter of fact. Even though geology says both of these could be carved by natural means, I highly doubt 2 things like that across this whole planet, 2 anomalies, if you will, are going to be suddenly carved just by chance right next to each other. But that is my opinion. But here's yet another picture of a pyramid on Mars.
Some conspiracy theorists believe that the ancient Egyptians were not advanced enough to build pyramids without the help of extraterrestrials.
Okay, 2 things here. First, I agree. I don't think that ancients were advanced enough to build the pyramids, or if they were, we have lost a lot of knowledge. I'm willing to accept either one of those answers. However, once again, I went over it last week why the word conspiracy theorist is what it is, and it was anybody who didn't agree with the official narrative. So I will proudly call myself a conspiracy theorist, and that's just a word that gets thrown around too often and has such an odd stigma to it. So let's just kind of keep in mind the actual reason that it's used is to make people like us that question things stop questioning things, which we will not do.
Could this be the solution? Number 8. Rodent. Fans of the Curiosity's photo uploads were surprised to spot a small, furry mammal in this 2013 image. Commenters argued over whether it most resembled a rat, squirrel, or a gopher.
When I do look at these pictures from Mars, I try to cross my eyes and just try to make sure that I can look at these pictures in such a way as to see if I can see just a rock. Kind of like those magic pictures that we used to have in the 90s where you'd have to see the picture under the picture, kind of have to relax or cross your eyes a little bit. I try to make sure I'm not having pareidotic experiences, and I look for the rock formations that I could be looking at opposed to whatever the object is. And let me tell you, this here looks straight up like a ground rodent of some type. Like it says a gopher, a groundhog, a mole. I can't tell what it is, but it definitely looks like a ground burrowing creature to me.
Number 7. Sarcophagus. The pyramid is not the only ancient Egyptian anomaly to have been found on the Red Planet. This outcrop resembles a pharaoh's coffin with face, headdress, and possibly even a false beard.
If anybody has seen the size of the Colossus of Rhodes or some of these oversized Greek statues, I mean the ones that look 20, 30, 50 feet tall, that's how big this sarcophagi would have to be that we're looking at in this picture. I'm telling you, this is carved into the rock facing on the side of a wall, and it looks straight up like an Egyptian coffin. And this might sound a little strange to you that it's got an Egyptian connection, but for those that don't know, Cairo means Little Mars. That's right, Cairo, Egypt. Cairo actually means Little Mars.
Number 6. Monolith. This large flat object stands upright in an otherwise empty crater, resembling some kind of monument.
And there have been claims that there have been pictures taken on the moon that possibly also show a monolith. So why also would we find yet another structure that we have here on Earth, a monument that we humans have built? Because we've got the, Washington Monument is a monolith. There's monoliths all across the world. There's supposedly one on the moon and now one on Mars. Is there some type of importance to the monolith that we don't know about, just like the pyramids?
Number 5. Gorilla. This completely unedited photo was taken by Spirit in 2003. It depicts something that undoubtedly resembles a mountain gorilla.
And though the temperature swings on the open surface might not suggest much animal life, especially the lack of trees, might not suggest much animal life on the surface, but I would argue that the possibility of life going underground or existing underground is quite high. That is, of course, a speculative argument. That is a theory and nothing more, if you will.
Number 4. Face. Amongst a pile of otherwise unremarkable rubble, this boulder has oddly human-like features. The apparent beard led several media outlets to dub it the face of God.
And once again, I make the argument that we as a civilization actually began on Mars and eventually made it to Earth, where we lost a lot of our knowledge, or maybe it was taken from us. But either way, I believe that we did not start on Earth, and I've wondered this for a long time. This is not something I've spoken publicly about very often, but it really makes you wonder, with all the artifacts that are starting to show up, is there, which in my opinion there is, a lot of evidence to suggest that there was a civilization of some type at one type on Mars that got destroyed by a nuclear accident or incident. I wouldn't even call it an accident. I would say a nuclear incident of some type.
Number 3. Reptile. With eyes, legs, a tail and a mouth, this Mars anomaly took the media by storm when it surfaced in 2012. However, NASA refused to turn the rover around to investigate, as it would have cost them literally millions of dollars.
In the environment prescribed to us that is supposed to be on Mars, reptilian creatures I could see being ones that would survive without a problem. Though some might question a food source, we don't know the vegetation sources that may or may not be underground once again, or in caves, or there's a large variety of areas that just haven't even been looked at by humans, at least in our lifetimes or since we came to the Earth itself.
Number 2. Humanoid. This photo by Curiosity shows what has been described by some as a humanoid figure. Ufologists likened its gait to the subject of Roger Patterson's 1967 video of an alleged Bigfoot.
Perhaps that's where the Bigfoots come from, right? Maybe they live in caves on Mars and just teleport to the Earth every now and again to hunt, right? It would explain a lot as far as why Bigfoots disappear all of a sudden, or why they seem interdimensional or are seen around UFOs, or maybe they fly here to hunt. Of course, I'm just being silly and speculative now, but we know that now the red planet is a decimated, dead planet. We are finding ruins and we are finding evidences of previous civilizations, but there's been no clear 100% blatant evidence, even in any circles, conspiracy or not, that has been found to suggest 100% without question, hands down, that there is a colony of some type that still exists on Mars. And of course, we could get into the secret space program, and that would be a whole nother series of episodes, and we may do that after October. We'll see, because October we're going to get into the spooky topics. That's right. But once again, getting back to what we were saying, the Mars itself right now is dead. It's a dead planet. It don't have an atmosphere. It doesn't have anything that would really be, quote, sustainable to us right now. At least that's what we're told. And yes, question everything we're told. I agree. But assuming that they're telling us some kind of truth when they say this, if they are talking about going to Mars, and there is a lot of talk nowadays about moving humanity to Mars in case the Earth gets too bad or something happens in the way that we cannot stop and we have to escape, perhaps Mars would be our next best bet, because it still is technically in the habitable zone. But how would we go about fixing Mars to suit our needs? We know we have pretty much terraformed the Earth to fit it as we like, as we discussed in the first half, but could we actually terraform Mars or any other region, maybe even the moon, right? But Mars specifically, in order to make it habitable for humankind? The answer is actually, yeah, we might actually be able to do that. And I could think of a way to do it, but let's see what else we can find as far as other people saying how possible it is to be done.
With towering volcanoes, swirling dust storms, and plumes of sublimating dry ice at its poles, the surreal landscape of Mars has captured earthly imagination for centuries. But what would it take to make it habitable? As in, a place where we could breathe, walk around without our blood boiling, or even grow crops and enjoy blue sunsets.
Now, of course, we could do a biodome of some type and just kind of build our own inner atmosphere type thing on the surface, but that I think would eventually be torn down and we would have to go outside at some point to repair stuff, so that's still not a feasible option in the end.
There have been some wild proposals about how to make Mars more suitable for humans.
Oh yeah? How wild?
From nuking the poles to hijacking a fleet of comets in order to kickstart a new climate.
I have to admit, those are pretty wild.
So, how close are we to terraforming Mars?
And like I said a moment ago, whether it's extinction events like some type of comet coming in or some type of unexpected event, maybe the volcanoes of the Earth suddenly go crazy, maybe something with the Earth's core happens, or there's a million things that could happen. Maybe the entire planet loses it and goes crazy and we just got to get out of here, right? There's so many reasons. Maybe there's too many hurricanes. Maybe global warming was actually a thing and we ignored it and we were wrong. I highly doubt that, but that is just my opinion. Anyway, moving along, there's so many reasons why we would need to leave the Earth. Also, look at the population, and eventually we are going to be piling on top of each other, and it might be nice to have a whole nother place to build habitats on and live on and work on, and just a whole new area for humankind to go, or I would argue go back to. But there's so many reasons to do it, but let's find out if it's possible and how it's possible, or theoretically possible, to do such a thing.
Terraforming is a term that was coined in science fiction.
And we've found so often that science fiction is merely science textbook that hasn't been figured out yet. And I know I say that facetiously, but not really, because a lot of our ideas for tech and a lot of our science ideas actually follow up from science fiction that we're just now catching up with or figuring out how to make. Like, we've still got some Star Trek technology that I'm still waiting to see. And again, that's a whole nother episode. But moving back to the topic at hand, the technology has always been just out of reach.
But today, the idea is being thrown around by a handful of actual scientists.
Which, once again, is the way it usually works. You get a science fiction idea that scientists scoff at until it becomes feasible, then all of a sudden they start talking about it like, oh yeah, of course you should have known that. The way they are. But it's good to hear scientists that are willing to have an open mind every now and again and look at these technologies and go, you know what, maybe I can do that.
Terraforming, put simply, is changing the atmosphere and climate of a planet so that it can support human life without the need for spacesuits.
To survive on Mars, that is, without extensive equipment and resupply from Earth, we need to be able to do a few simple things.
Well, I like simple. I don't know about you guys, so let's see just how simple these things are.
Breathe, stay conscious, and not freeze to death.
All three of which seem pretty important to me.
If we can figure out those 3 hurdles, we'd have the luxury of worrying about longer-term concerns, like how to grow food or shield ourselves from radiation. True, Mars doesn't sound that hospitable, but after multiple missions, we found clues that this wasn't always the case.
We see evidence that there was liquid water running over the surface of Mars. The atmosphere must have been thicker so that greenhouse trapping of heat from the sun would warm the planet and allow liquid water.
And it just reiterates what we've spoken about a lot tonight, the idea that there was a civilization at one time on the red planet. At least that is my argument. And my argument following up to be the civilization there was the civilization that I'm speaking to right now.
Most of Mars' atmosphere escaped to space over the last 4 billion years.
To restore it to a version that's more livable for humans, we'd have to address breathing first.
Though I don't disagree, breathing is the first thing that we definitely need to tackle. I do argue that it slowly lost its atmosphere over 4 some odd billion years. I think the atmosphere was stripped away a lot more instantly and has since then eroded down what may have been left at the time.
On Earth, we have a delicious atmosphere made of around 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, and a little bit of everything else.
It wouldn't need to be exactly that mix, but we would need a very similar amount of oxygen, but there certainly is enough water locked up in ice on Mars to get some O2 for you. And unfortunately, there probably isn't enough nitrogen that we could easily get to build up an Earth-like, mostly nitrogen atmosphere. If you're willing to wear, like a gas mask, then the gases could be pretty much anything which isn't corrosive or acidic. You have to carry oxygen on your back. That could be an intermediate step.
Okay, fine. I'll agree to wear a DJ Marshmallow mask for a little while if I could skip the spacesuit.
And nitrogen is found in high abundance on Earth. As a matter of fact, it is found in the waste of a lot of animals. So if we could solve breathing problems, perhaps we could get animals like chickens who have a high nitrogen level within their waste product, and that could actually be refined into a usable product that could be breathed later on. There's many other creatures that produce nitrogen naturally, so that again could be used for the breathing as well as being used as fertilizer for the plants that would need to be grown, but that's getting ahead of ourselves.
So that brings us to our other goals, staying awake and warm. And it turns out these two actually go hand in hand. If you stepped outside on Mars today, you'd pass out instantly and die shortly after, as the low pressure literally pulled the oxygen out of your blood. Temperatures on Mars sit, on average, at a chilly minus 63 degrees Celsius. But if we could thicken the atmosphere by adding some mass to it, we might be able to kickstart a greenhouse effect that would stabilize the temperature and stave off some of that deadly radiation as well. That's the essence of terraforming.
So the question becomes, is there enough CO2 anywhere on Mars that we could mobilize it and put it back into the atmosphere?
In terms of the very first sort of easy baby steps of terraforming Mars would be the release of the kind of easily accessible CO2. Now, this is the south pole of Mars here. It's kind of hard to see there, but it's some water ice, but mostly the CO2 ice down here. If you started making the planet warmer, you would sublimate more of it, or you could just nuke it.
The fast way is drop thermonuclear weapons over the poles.
And yes, that was Elon Musk that suggested to drop nuclear weapons over the poles of Mars. And I gotta say, I am not a big fan of this particular way of getting the ice to melt and release these needed chemicals. I personally think if we put enough manufacturing of some type, automatic robotic manufacturing, possibly even solar power to begin with, that could withstand the degrees of Mars and the state of Mars, if you will, then it would be easy to create factories that would build up these greenhouse gases and thicken the atmosphere like we've supposedly already done to the Earth, which apparently on Earth is a bad thing because it's already terraformed as needed. But if we did this on Mars, we could actually create this greenhouse effect, thicken the atmosphere up, and create an atmosphere that humans would have no problem living in. So what we consider pollution here would actually be a lifesaver there, at least opposed to, I don't know, nuclear radiation pollution. I don't know about you, but it reminds me of the old Einstein adage, we can't use the same thinking to solve the problem that got us into the problem to begin with.
That would only double the atmospheric pressure on Mars. So we would go from 6% of the Earth's atmosphere to 12%. And that's so not enough to heat up the planet.
Other sources of that desirable atmosphere for terraforming could be hiding in Martian minerals and dust, but they're tricky to unlock.
Carbon-bearing minerals have to be heated up to several hundred degrees, so you'd have to strip mine the planet globally in order to mobilize that CO2.
And though once again I argue a robot fleet sent ahead of humans to do these things would work, I don't like the idea of strip mining any planet, whether it be Earth or Mars, especially if it's going to take that to get the amount needed. Once again, I think we just should build a couple factories and produce a couple years of smoke into the air and just thicken the atmosphere up and make a runaway greenhouse effect, which creates much more Earth-like conditions.
Mars has 140 trillion square meters. So that's about 1,000,000 billion tons of gas that we would need dug up out of the ground and then vaporized or somehow released from those minerals. And the energy required to do that is staggering. You'd need the equivalent of running 10,000 gigawatt nuclear power plants constantly for 10 to 40,000 years.
Now, we might be able to use something more efficient, a super greenhouse gas like hydrochlorofluorocarbons, for example. But we need to build hundreds of factories on the planet's surface to pump out enough of it to affect the climate. Then, of course, we'd have to add back in our custom cocktail of gases to allow us to take off our gas masks and oxygen tanks, let alone grow any crops.
Which, once again, I think is the most viable option, by sending machines which are also going to be pumping out these CFCs just naturally as they work. Eventually, over a very short amount of time, relatively speaking, there would be no time at all that we would have these factories built and the abilities to breathe air and grow crops on the planet's surface, no problem, thanks to the same thing that it became a problem on Earth would be a savior on Mars.
So let's investigate our next option, stealing the building blocks of an atmosphere from comets.
There is a large source of nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, etc. in the form of comets. If you could redirect something like, depending on how big they are, 10,000 to 1,000,000 comets, and you were able to crash them into Mars on purpose, that would be possible given the sort of distribution of comets that we have now.
That still sounds highly unfeasible. Not to count having the tech to do that. We're not even going to get into discussing the tech to move comets and asteroids and things like that. That's a whole nother discussion. But just the fact that if you had the tech at all, over 1 million of these to be redirected to bombard a planet, that is some extreme technology, and that's a lot of comets hitting a planet in order to make this change. Not to say it couldn't occur or wouldn't work, but that's a little, that's science fiction at its best, I gotta say. Even I gotta call shenanigans on this one.
If you've got 1 million kilometer-sized objects hitting Mars, that would be pretty damaging. It would probably devastate the entire surface.
But really what you would need would be an army of self-replicating robots that could essentially attach what people call mass drivers, which would be, let's say, a nuclear power plant on a comet, which could be fed by the water of that comet, and then would use that same water as propellant to act like a rocket, and over the course of years, redirect those comets to eventually impact Mars.
I see so many problems with this idea, the least of which being self-replicating. I think that is the worst thing we could ever do, is create self-creating machines. Machines that'll build a factory, fine. Machines that'll rebuild themselves over and over and over and over, that is a bad idea. If anybody has read science fiction, they will know that this could take over the universe and become what later becomes called gray goo. So this is a very, very horrible idea of self-replication. Second, the ability to use these nanos to slowly over time change the trajectory of a comet. Again, I think this has too many variables that can go way too wrong way too easily. I think something better should be done about this. If you want to get a whole bunch of nanotech that'll build together and create a net or something to move a bunch of comets, you know, fine, I can totally see that. But this self-replicating nanobots is a horrible idea in this wolf's opinion.
Sounds like some pretty heavy lifting. But with a new global enthusiasm for space exploration at lower costs, we might see some of the technical advances required to inch us closer to this vision, like autonomous navigation and in-space assembly of spacecraft, sooner than we think. But even if we can build and master all of this technology, should we charge forth in aggressively tailoring the solar system to our species' comfort zone? And how much should we promote the idea of having a spare planet in our backyard?
Both of which are amazing questions, and I once again stand on my answers from earlier. I think it is a great idea, whether it be catastrophe or overpopulation or run out of resources or whatever the case may be, or maybe some of us just want to get away from the rest of us, not myself included, but I know those that do. So guys, there's a lot of reasons why we could or should or may even end up terraforming the planet of Mars. But what do you think? Do you think it's able to be terraformed? Do you think it's even out there at all? Do you think it's planets even exist? Or do you think space even exists? Or do you think I've just wasted my time for the last 5 or 6 episodes? Otherwise, do you think possibly terraforming Mars is possible if it does exist? Do you think we as humans should or could or would or will be able to terraform Mars in the future? Or do you think perhaps that we once as a civilization actually lived on Mars and had to escape and flee to the Earth instead of the other way around? Instead of us fleeing to Mars, do you think possibly we lived on Mars and maybe had to flee to Earth? And maybe that's where some of these anomalistic things in our timelines, in our genetic lineup, and the things that science still can't explain, even all the way down to the pyramids and a lot of the ancient structures that we can't explain to this day, perhaps they weren't built by us at all, because perhaps we were elsewhere, or maybe we built them and we have lost the knowledge. But either way, perhaps we came to this planet because we do have a lot of things on this planet that are bad for us. We've included the sun itself. We sunburn, we freeze to death, we do these so easily. It's like the planet is out to kill us, and if we evolved with it, you would think, also not to count our differential between all of us and all the animals on the earth, you would think that we would have a lot more in common with the earth if we did evolve here to begin with. But ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to space, when it comes to science, when it comes to Mars, when it comes to the moon, when it comes to the madness that we talk about every week, in the end, as always, ladies and gentlemen, you be the judge. We got to close it out. That's right, that's it for this episode of the Dark Wolf's Den Show for Thursday, September 24th, 2020. I hope everybody has enjoyed this episode and this series that we've done. We started the Schumann Resonance, and then we went through Directed Energy Weapons, and everything had a space theme to it. Then the last 2 nights we did Moon Madness, followed tonight by Mars Madness. I hope you guys have enjoyed this special series, both 2-part and multi-part combined. So I thank everyone for tuning in and being here tonight and during every one of these episodes. You guys really do mean a lot to us. Guys, the den may be closing, but don't you worry, the weekend fun is only just begun. Make sure you come back every Friday through Sunday, guys. I can't believe this. He is 2 weeks in a row giving me Thursday, guys. How you liking it? You guys enjoy Dark Wolf on a Thursday? Go ahead and throw a 1 in the chat room if you've enjoyed Dark Wolf being on Thursday nights these last couple weeks. But guys, coming up this Friday night, tomorrow night, you do not want to miss this. Our buddy AJ, the Ripon Rabbit over there, the Ripon Rabbit Hole live show, is going to be talking about a well overdue subject: unmasked. Guys, it's time to take these masks off. It's time to have this conversation. It's time to look into the real science and bring out the facts and tell people what's really going on. It's time to break through the propaganda. And if we're still on the air here on YouTube, then on Saturday, AJ will be talking about procrastination. I wonder how long he I wonder how long he procrastinated doing that show. Probably a couple months. And then on Sunday, he's going to get all tangled up in the string theory rabbit hole, guys. That rabbit hole goes really, really deep, and it's full of strings. So I'm sure our buddy AJ the Ripon Rabbit over there will enjoy getting tangled around in that rabbit hole, and I hope you guys enjoy it too, as well as all of the weekend topics. You guys remember, every show starts at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, right here on the network. And make sure you go over to the riponrabbithole.com and help us out by signing up for that newsletter, so you'll find out exactly when every show airs and what the topics are every week. We send out one email at the very beginning of the week on Wednesday, and that is it. We do not sell your information, rent, lease, or any other form of sharing your information whatsoever. So please, guys, go over there, sign up for that. Make sure you know when we're going on the air and what our topics are going to be each night. Guys, I'm also going to go over there myself. I'm going to go over to the Ripon Rabbit Hole VIP Backstage Lounge. That's where you can find me hanging out right after this show and after every show, to be honest with you. I love hanging out over there, guys. It's easy for you to come join me. You can go over to the riponrabbithole.com. That is RIPONRABBITHOLE.com. Go over there and click the 24/7 Backstage Lounge. Scroll on halfway down the page, click that VIP entrance, come on in and hang out with us. We would love to have you in there. It's absolutely free, so no worries there. While you're over on the RiponRabbitHole.com, make sure you drop by the groups section, what we call our rabbit holes over there, and let me know which you want to hear me talk about. I have a groups over there called the Dark Wolf's Den Topics Groups and show suggestions and topics group, something like that. Anyway, guys, go ahead and let me know what topic you want to hear us talk about on the air, and we'll gladly get that on the air for you. The last couple weeks, we've had both challenge topics as well as viewer requested here on the network between myself and AJ. So, guys, that's it for me. My name is Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and on behalf of everyone responsible for making this show possible, on behalf of AJ the Ripon Rabbit, and on behalf of Ripon Common Sense Radio, we thank you for being here, and remember, until we meet again, ladies and gentlemen, stay awake, but dare to dream. Bye, everybody.
Oh, yeah. That means we are well underway here at the weekend of the Ripon Rabbit Hole. My top hat's off to you, Jerry Hicks, for taking on the show tonight. Thank you. A much-needed break for myself and Nikki Rabbit as we've just completed our 1,600-plus mile round-trip road trip between Southern California, Northern California, and Las Vegas. And I'm going to tell you all about it tomorrow night, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, in a show I call Unmasked. You want to be here. That's Friday, September 25th, tomorrow night. Mark your calendars. I think I'm going to do open lines. The topic is so controversial. I think I'm opening up lines. I think it's time we start to talk about these masks, people. Have you heard about this? Cotton lung. We're going to talk in detail about it tomorrow night, but apparently wearing masks creates fibers from the cotton, and you're breathing this into your lungs, folks. I'm telling you what, it's time to have this talk. So join me tomorrow night, Friday, September 25th, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Then Saturday night, September 26th, I'm going to take on procrastination. Why do today what you can put off until tomorrow? Procrastination, as the rabbit hole goes deep Saturday night. Then we're going to end out the weekend together right. You and I together, having a discussion about string theory, an audience suggested topic. String theory and how it pertains and applies to us today in 2020. Tune in Sunday, September 27th, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, and find out. If you enjoyed tonight's look at Mars Madness, make sure to thumb up that video if you haven't done so already. Hit that subscribe button and ring that bell. You'll get our notifications every time we go live. That's every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights, bringing you the very best of Common Sense Radio, the RiponRabbitHole.com. If you haven't done so already, please make your way on over to the RiponRabbitHole.com, where the conversation continues in the VIP 24/7 chat lounge. I can't wait to connect with some of you there, and hopefully, if you haven't done so already, you make your way on over and explore, connecting your camera, your microphone, grabbing a seat where the conversation continues. It goes on and on and on. So for many of you, the conversation ends here, but for the Ripon Rabbits, it's just beginning, and I hope to see you there. Until we meet again, I'm AJ, the Ripon Rabbit. Take care of yourselves and each other. Good night.
On
things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever home. Oh, what a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner. Is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner, is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion? I'm lost in wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just